All right, guys, today we're going to be working on this 1.4 liter Ecotec in a 2012 Chevy Cruze. And the job we're doing today is we're going to be addressing an oil pan leak. If I kind of slide this car back a little bit, I got her in neutral right now, and we look right here on the floor. It's a pretty extensive leak coming from the pan, as you can see on the floor. Now, this is accumulated over several days, of course, but it's definitely a problem we won't want to let go anymore. So we're going to dive into that. It's going to start off like an oil change, and then it's going to progress into removing the items that the service manual dictates that we need to do to tackle this leak. So let's get into it. Guys, we're going to go ahead and get this drain plug off and let it drain. But before we do, let's just show how the damage is. So you can see the oil accumulates on this shield. And then we can see here, if we take a clean paper towel, we can see how it's just accumulating up on the edge. We can see it's dripping back here, right? So it accumulates enough that it starts to fall on the driveway or the garage floor, as the case may be. We can see we got oil all over this pan, where through the motion of the air as the vehicle's driving, it's accumulating here, it's dripping on the plug, and then it's probably also dripping along the back here. Let's go ahead and get this guy going while we talk. Just let all that drain out. So we can also see, if we zoom in up on the front here, it's probably happening in this front corner and then working its way down and blowing by, and then when the vehicle's at rest, just dripping and accumulating. We're going to take the shield off next after we get the oil drained out, and we'll have a better look at where the source is. All right, guys, it's an 8mm to remove the sheet metal screws that are holding on this plastic undershield. This being a 2012, you know, it's got the cut shield from the recall they had a few years ago, where they had fires occurring from dripping engine oil. So if yours has got a full shield and it doesn't have the cutout opening the way you saw on this one, you got a recall you should have went and gotten done at the dealer. So there's two here, one here, and one here of these 8mm. And then there's another one down here towards the excuse me, towards the middle. And for some reason, that one's a different size. 7. That's unusual. And then there's one more in the back. So now we're going to pop these plastic push pin clips out. There's one here in the front. So you see, you just take a trim tool like this, or you can take a small flathead screwdriver in this indentation you see, pull the pin up, and then you can pull and remove the actual fastener. Right, one of these types. There's one here. There's one in the back here. Let me see if I can move our light for you. One back here. And I don't know if you can see it, but there's one right here on the underside where my thumb is, right there. So we're going to take those two off, and then we'll be able to drop this shield. All right, guys, we got that shield off. Obviously, we've got a lot of oil that we got to clean up on this frame piece here, this subframe. But here we can see what we were looking at earlier. We got a lot of oil accumulated right around here, but we also got a lot of oil accumulated right above here. And if we zoom in past the belt here and take a look at the crankshaft pulley, we can also see we've got some oil over there as well. So I already knew that this one also needs a crankshaft pulley seal on the front here, and we'll do that in a separate video. But I'm just showing you how you can highlight and zero in on where the source of the leak is. So we're going to go ahead in this video and tackle the pan. So in order to get the pan off, we're going to have to make some clearance, right? You can see these bolts. They're not so hard to get at. But if we fold back here a little bit, we can see that the catalytic converter and the exhaust pipe here on this 1.4 liter turbo is going to be in our way of removing the pan. So I'll take you through the service manual procedure, but it's going to call for disassembling this section of the exhaust so that we can get the clearance to pull the pan down, clean it up, reseal it, and put it back together. So let's take a look at the service manual. All right, guys, we're going to use the Cruze manual for 2012, but it's the same for any of these Ecotec 1.4 liter turbos, Sonic, Trax, Buick Encore, or Cruze. So under the section here for the oil pan replacement on the 1.4 liter, We've already done part of this, right? We've drained the engine oil. We have to pull the filter at some point as well, just like an oil and filter change. I mentioned that the catalytic converter and the exhaust pipes are in the way, so they talk about how you have to remove that. They're talking about a two-piece. There's a warm-up converter that's attached to the turbocharger itself, and then there's another catalytic converter that's in the back of that that's part of the exhaust system. And if you happen to have an engine oil heater, if you're up north, you'll have to pull that. I'll show you those instructions. This particular vehicle doesn't have that. So we're going to get to a point where all of this is out of the way, and when that's out of the way, then we can begin removing these 3 bolts on the pan where it attaches to the transmission, and then the bolts that go around the perimeter of the pan, the ones that are up here in the corner of which we were looking at that were leaking. So once that's out of the way, we'll be in a position to drop the pan. So let's take a look at what's involved in removing the exhaust system. So there's 3 nuts that are securing this exhaust pipe between the gasket up to the warm-up converter. There's an O2 sensor that has to be disconnected. There's a cross member with 4 bolts and 2 nuts, the outer 2 of which are torque to yield, which means they're going to get tossed and have to be replaced in this procedure. And we're going to drop those, and then we're going to be able to remove the nuts that are holding the back part of this pipe that attach up here to the muffler. That's the service manual procedure. Some other ways you might go about doing it, you might just try to drop the converter off the turbo here and leave it connected here and here and just let this whole thing droop down. You'd still have, either way, you're going to have to remove the cross member and the bolts that you see down here. But that's an option if you're in a northern climate and these guys are excessively rusted. Even where I am in the south, we're going to have to heat these nuts up in order not to break the studs. But I'm going to go ahead with the service manual procedure here just so that it references what you've got in the book and we don't do anything different. But there's a number of different ways you can do this. The main thing is this pipe and this converter are going to be blocking the ability to remove the oil pan. So at a minimum, we've got to get this pipe dropped down now the way, and we've got to get the converter loosened up so we can tilt it out of the way. You know, no matter how you slice it, that's what you got to do in order to get back to the stage where we can pull the pan. So let's go ahead and get started on those nuts. We'll go back down underneath and I'll show you how we get them off. All right, guys, while that oil's dripping out, let's go ahead and pull the filter. So it's right down here. I got a filter adapter. Go ahead and loosen this one up. You can get down to it and loosen it by hand. So you can use an adapter like this. If you don't have one of these, I can put a link in the description. Makes it real easy to get them off. Go ahead and get a paper towel here. This is all pretty routine stuff, but all part of what you have to do for this particular repair. Okay, so then we'll put a new filter in here as well. All right, guys, just, routine stuff. We're going to go ahead and swap out the O-ring that's on the filter cap. The AC Delco filter comes with a new one. Get that all in place. Put our new filter in. And then we're all ready to reinstall it. So what we're using is an AC Delco PF2257G or a GM number 55594651, which is the correct application for this 1.4 liter. So we're just going to put a little bit of oil along the O-ring and put this guy back on and go back underneath. All right, guys, we're going to get started on these 3 nuts that hold the exhaust pipe to the front warm-up converter. And you can see here zoomed in, they're pretty badly corroded and guaranteed probably to break at least one of these studs. We're going to try and avoid that by applying some heat. Now you can get a torch under here. I'm going to be using a bolt buster. It's going to basically be the kind of same effect. We're just going to get under here and heat this guy up and then try to use the heating of the nut to kind of break the seal of the rust. Just takes a few seconds with a tool like this. We don't have to get it cherry red or anything. Just kind of discolor it a little bit to start. If not, we'll just do it again until we can get it to free up. You can see there's some smoke on this upper side there, indicating that we're heating it up. It's got like a black color to it. She's not ready to budge yet. And the problem with these guys, you know, they're just exposed to such intense heat. And then everything from the ground, any kind of salt during the winter, everything just gradually heats them up there. If you zoom in here, I'm not going to touch this guy, but you can see it's almost like it's welded with the threads and the shape that they're in. So we may not be able to save it, even with this kind of a tool. Okay, we got it like cherry red that time. There we go. And we're doing something like this as we loosen it, and tighten it, loosen it, tighten it. Basically 4 off and then 2 back on so we can get it to let go. You know, a tool like this is just really handy, but you know, a torch will work just as well. Now all these nuts have to be discarded anyway. I'll show you when we look at the detailed writing on the service manual. But right now we're just interested in getting them off. All right, so that guy we got loose. We're going to do these other two, and then we'll come back and get started on the cross member in the rear. All right, guys, just finishing up the third nut here. I figured I'd just show you what these threads look like as soon as I get this off. No broken studs, as you can see. But while I'm doing this, you can kind of make out on the other two how badly the threads are damaged on the piece that was exposed. And so what typically happens if you don't heat it up, kind of gets wedged on there as it's coming off, like this one here. So you can see all 3 of them are pretty bad in that regard. But at this point, this guy's all loose and ready to come out. So now let's go ahead and proceed to the back. All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and put one nut back in to hold this flange piece on up here before we go to the back and drop it, just because we don't want this thing to fall on the ground. We're always trying to protect this piece of flexible pipe in everything we do. All right, guys, as we move to the back, we've got this O2 sensor harness here that's in the middle. So right behind the engine area, you know, you're looking down. It's just one of these kind of guys where you give it a push, a squeeze, and it comes undone, right? So it's just a little push clip All right, guys, here's a view of that O2 sensor connector from this side. Might be a little easier to see. Just give this guy a squeeze. It comes right out. All right, let's keep heading back. All right, guys, so in the back, all right, you're going to have a 15 millimeter torque to yield bolt, then a 13 millimeter regular bolt, and then a 13 millimeter nut. And you're going to have that hardware on both sides of this bar. So I'll show you taking it off on the passenger side. We're just going to zip these off with an impact wrench. Just going to change my socket here. Now we're going to do this on the other side, and we'll be able to drop this down. All right, guys, once you drop that cross member piece, these are the insulators, rubber insulators that the nuts went on, the 13 millimeter nuts attached to the bottom of these insulators. There's your other catalytic converter. And then here's the last two nuts holding this exhaust pipe system on. And if we position our light, zoom in here, we can see these are even more corroded than the ones up front. Can't even make out any threads at all, right? So we'll do the same technique we did up front with the bolt buster. You can also torch them as well, trying to retain these studs. We got one on this side and one on this other side, and of course we can see there's a gasket in between the two. But we're going to go ahead, heat these, and bring these off so that we can separate the muffler from this exhaust pipe piece with the cat converter. All right, guys, we're taking a look at this these two rear studs and nuts. And the corrosion here is really bad, right? You can see the gasket nestled in between the flange of the pipe that goes to the muffler there on the left and the pipe that goes to the catalytic converter on the right. And it won't even fit the 13 millimeter socket it's supposed to fit, that it's so badly rusted. So I'm just going to leave these, and we're going to skip this step in the service manual, and we're going to take one of those other techniques I mentioned where we're just going to lower it from the front. All right, guys, we're going to come back up here to the front, and we're going to take this nut off that we put back on here to hold this piece. Sorry, I might block your light for a minute. All right, so we can move the light, give you a better view like this. All right, so we're just going to work this piece off, and then we're going to very gently, so if we pan the camera down the length of the car here, and you can see down towards the back, we're just going to let this lower slowly down. And then what we're going to do is we're going to get a jack underneath the muffler, and we're just going to have it held right about here. This is not the ideal thing. I really wanted to get this completely out of the way, but because of that corrosion in the back, that's not going to happen. But this still gets it enough out of our way so that we can get the pan down, all right? So that's the next step here, is we're just going to get this stabilized, and then we're going to go ahead and start removing this catalytic converter up here in the front. All right, guys, in order to get the front cat off, we're going to start with this 13 millimeter bolt that holds this V-clamp in position. And we're going to loosen this guy up. Now, these can be corroded on pretty bad. This vehicle had the turbocharger replaced earlier in the year, so it's not going to be that bad to get off. So don't let what I'm doing here fool you. If it hasn't been removed since it was built, it can be on there pretty hard. Might want to spray some PB Blaster on it to work it loose. But we're going to get this guy all the way out. The nut's captive. I want to get it until we get the whole thing opened up. And the reason for that is we want to be able to open this, right? This is not reusable. These have to be replaced anyway. All right, so we got that side open and loose. We're trying to get a little bit of some flex on the bottom side. And to get a better visibility into what we're doing here, you don't have to do it, but it makes it easier to see the bolt that is holding. There's a stud, there's two studs, and there's a 10 millimeter nut right under this exhaust shield towards the bottom, and then there's one down underneath where we were before. It's a little bit easier to see if you take this exhaust heat shield off. And so we're going to do that, and then we're going to pull that 10. All right, guys, to get this exhaust heat shield off, we're going to need an E10 socket. We got 3 fasteners, 2 here at the top, and 1 attached right down below. Now these shouldn't be hard to get off, even with it being an exhaust area. These are plated fasteners, and even though they screw into a standoff that goes into the exhaust manifold, they don't typically get too corroded. We're going to get this guy right down here. This one just screws right into the turbocharger aluminum. So this one should be the easiest of all to get off. Just once you pop the torque, it should be finger tight. And then we got one more up there on the top. Okay, there's this guy. And then we got this guy here. And with this out of the way, we should have a little bit better visibility down to see that nut I was talking about that we have to get off to remove the catalytic converter. All right, those 3 fasteners off. Get this heat shield out of the way. And again, this is optional. I'm just doing this because it's going to give me some better visibility. All right, so you can see a better view of this clamp now. Just need to see if I can get a way to give it a couple of love taps to get it come loose so we can twist it a little bit. Then I'll get a light. We can see what that nut looks like down there. All right, guys, with the heat shield off, if we zoom in now, we can see that little 10 millimeter nut on top of this stud for the catalytic converter. There's another one just like it underneath that I'll show you next. So we just have to get a 10 millimeter socket on there. You have to block your view for a moment to do that. It's a tight fit, but there's a little rubber air hose here. So fortunately, there's some flexibility, right? So there's this rubber hose here will give you a little bit of flexibility for a 3/8 type of socket and extension. If you don't have that, if you only have a half, you're not going to be able to get in here. You probably want to try and get a 1/4 in here. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and pull this off, and then we'll go underneath. All right, guys, if we go back underneath and you look in from the passenger side, here's the nut we were just loosening right here. And then if we come down, there's the second nut on the other stud that's holding the catalytic converter. All right, so we're just going to come in here and loosen this guy now. Now typically this one's not so bad. It's the upper one that's more corroded. Don't know why. Maybe just closer to the exhaust manifold. Not sure. But with both of these loosened now, and that clamp released, so now our catalytic converter can move around. We're not quite done yet, but this is what you need to do, right? So the next thing that we'll do is we'll go ahead and we'll continue to fully remove this nut up here that we looked at up above so that we can pull this back all the way. That'll let us get that clamp out of the way, and then we're going to disconnect the O2 sensor. So we'll go back above. I'll show you how to disconnect that. All right, guys, so we've got our clamp loosened up now that we've got all the slack off of those 2 bolts, and we can actually work it up onto the turbo, get it off of the cat converter. Before we drop it, though, we've got this O2 sensor. This blue wire routes all the way up to here. And then if we take a look here, you can see sometimes these are broken, but not on this car. And take a look inside here with this mirror and zoom in. And what's on the mirror here, and we can see there's a little clip behind here that you have to press in with a pair of needle nose pliers. and that'll let you pull this little mount off the bracket for the O2 sensor, and then we can disconnect it. So we're going to get some appropriate pliers, and we're going to give it a squeeze, and we're going to take it off the bracket. All right, guys, I'm going to come in with a tool like this, and I'm just going to give that little clip a squeeze while I push. Get my hand in here. All right, get that out. A lot of times people don't know that's there, and they end up breaking it off. And hopefully I can disconnect this without blocking your view. There's a little retainer that we have to pop up. I'm just going to take a small flathead screwdriver. Maybe not small, just whatever I had handy here. So I can get a grip on this. There we go. So this little guy here pops up, and then when he pops up enough, it'll allow you to unplug it. There you go. That's the way we got it out without breaking the little mounting clip there. All right, so that's what that looks like. All right, guys, got a couple of tools that help us get this seal off. So if we zoom in a little bit, we can see there's a crush seal here that sits between the cat and the turbocharger, and this has to be replaced. So we're going to get this off too. Usually not on this bad, but all right, it went down below the car, but that will show the part number later. That has to be replaced as well. All right, so next thing we're going to do is going to get this V-clamp out of here because, like we said, that also cannot be reused. All right, guys, before we do anything else, we're going to put something, a little Ziploc bag, over the top of our cat because we don't want any debris falling in there and getting in the element. I'm probably blocking your view here, but there's not much you're seeing. Just let me put this on here. All right, so now we got to get this V-clamp off. So let's zoom in on this a little bit. There's a little trick or technique to getting these off. So you can't rotate it this way because the head of the bolt will hit the oil cooler line that goes to the turbocharger. And this nut, if you try to rotate it in the other direction, ends up hitting, you can't really see it from this view, but it's hitting the oil cooler that's in the back attached to the engine. But what you can see here is there's a little brazed on flap right here if we zoom in. And this piece here is the only piece that'll clear this pipe, right? So this coolant pipe that runs down here, and I got my finger on it down here. If you turn this so that it's facing that pipe and you give it a little twist, that's how you get this off. Right, and that's how you get the new one on. So anyway, this can't be reused. So let me show you why this can't be reused. So if we reference the service manual, and we step back to the procedure that we started with, that we talked about that we were doing, right? So they talk about that you want to remove the exhaust pipe to exhaust muffler nuts here in the back. There are two of them, and we ended up electing not to do that due to corrosion. But if you do go that route, you would take those two nuts off, and there'd be a gasket in there, and the studs are part of the muffler. They're actually made onto the flange. So if you can't get them off, you can do what I just did, and you can skip that part. The next thing they tell you to do is support the muffler with a jack. Now, we did that. I didn't show that, but I'll show it to you later. They also tell you cannot reuse the nuts. You have to get new ones. Now, if you do go that route, since I didn't, I will share you the part number for it when we get to the end. Even though I didn't use them, I have the part number for you, and also for the gasket. And then they talk about the catalytic converter to the exhaust pipe front pipe nuts, these three. And again, new nuts, do not reuse the old ones. There's the torque for these and the torque for those in the back, and the torque for ones in the front. So the ones in the front that get 16 foot-pounds are these three here. And these are copper-clad nuts, kind of like the ones that hold the turbocharger on. And the ones in the back here that get 13 foot-pounds, they're just standard zinc cadmium type silver-coated. Now there's also a gasket here, as you can see, in between this pipe flange and the catalytic converter. There's a gasket that goes here with the diamond shaped. And then there's also, like I said back here, a standard 2-hole gasket that goes to the back. I'll give you the part numbers for all this when we get to the back. Now those bolts that we took out from the frame crossmember, again, the ones on the outer side are torque to yield. You cannot reuse the old ones. You got to put new ones in. I'll give you those part numbers at the end. But they're talking about part number 5, which is these outer 15mm bolts. The 13mm bolt and the 13mm nut that retains the rubber bushing for the vibration on the exhaust pipe, those are standard and you can reuse them. So they talk about that over here, right? So you can reuse the 2 bolts that are M8. Those get 16. Again, these are torque to yield, so it's 44 foot-pounds plus 30 to 45 degrees with a torque angle gauge on top of that torque. And then we've got the 2 13mm nuts that hold those insulators that go to 13 foot-pounds. Right? And then there's a torque if you actually remove the O2 sensor. We elected to unplug it rather than remove it, but if you go the other route, there's your torque value. So that's how all of this worked. Now, when it comes down to actually getting this torque converter, this 3-way warm-up converter off of the turbocharger, here's the V-clamp here, and the service manual gives you a close-up of what we showed before with the 3 nuts and the gasket. The studs are part of the warm-up converter. But what they talk about is you go through all this, and here's the 2 nuts that we removed, right? The 10mm nut on the bottom and the 10mm nut on the top. As you're viewing in, coming in from the passenger side, there's the kind of view we showed you from below. When you get to the installation procedure, install a new 3-way warm-up catalytic converter V-clamp, right? So you cannot reuse the V-clamp. They talk to you about never reuse the V-clamp, right? Because it's got to have a certain torque to it to prevent an exhaust manifold leak between the turbocharger and the catalytic converter. So that's why you have to do that. All right, so we are at a point now, we'll come back to this later when we get ready to put things together and torque it. We're at a point now where we can make sure we've got enough play in this that we can get it to drop down, and we do. It's moving around quite a bit. So we should be able to go down the bottom now that we've got it disconnected with the wiring and all, and pull it out, and now we're finally ready to start taking the bolts out of the oil pan. All right, guys, so just need to kind of twist it a little bit, and she will come straight down and out. And we can set her aside until we get ready to put it back in. And then there's that crushable seal that I mentioned that fell off before and we took it off. At this point now, we are in good shape to access the fasteners that are holding on the oil pan, right? We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 here. We've got 6 on the other side. We've got 1, 2 here. I believe we've got 2 in a recessed area here. Let me go get the appropriate, I think it's an E10 socket, and we'll get started pulling these out. All right, guys, this is an E10 again. I'm just going to come over here and start loosening all of these. Not necessarily going to have you sit through the whole thing here, right? So I'm going to take these off on this side. I'm going to do the exact same thing on the other side, and then we'll come back. All right, guys, with those 6 on either side out, we've got 2 here. There's 1 here and 1 at the other end of the pan. We'll take those 2 guys out. And then we'll go do these ones over here. So if we pull the camera back towards the front, there's these recessed areas right here. And this particular socket, I'm going to need a deeper socket to get in here and get those 2. But we'll come back and get those with the right socket. All right, guys, we've got the 6 out on each side, 12, the 2 on the end, 14. Now we've got these 2 15s that attach the bell housing. Whoops. There we go. All right. Take these 2 out, and then we got a few more. All right, guys, on this rearmost 15mm, it's actually retaining this little bracket shield that you see here. And it's also held by an additional 18mm. It's right here. So you'll have to take off both of these in order to get this bracket cleared out of the way. All right, and then that completes those bolts. All right, guys, last two bolts. These recessed E10s inside here. Just work these out, and then we can go ahead and remove the pan. We've gotten the two 15s out of the bell housing. We've gotten the 18 that held the little metal bracket there, and that's probably optional. We probably could have left that there, but we just get everything out of the way is the best course of action, because you never know what's going to get in your way clearance-wise. We got the 6 E10s along each side, and then we got the 2 E10s at the opposite end. Now, something like this may not just fall out. There's been a lot of sealant around this. It's the original factory sealant. It feels like it's all the way loose and doesn't come out. You can put a magnet up in here and pull it out with that. All right, that's our last guy. All right, guys, with all these bolts off, now we just need to get the pan to separate off the residual gasket material. We just want to gingerly try prizing it in a few spots like this corner here. And what we might also do, if we don't get any progress with that, get a rubber mallet and try to give it a few hits here. What's always amazing to me is these guys can end up leaking, and yet they're held on like they're glued still. This is all aluminum, right? So you don't want to do anything harsh or drastic. You want to be very gentle. That's why I'm trying to use smaller prizing tools. Just trying to get a little bit of flex going on. We're going to keep doing that on this corner, and then we'll go ahead and repeat the same process in the other corner. So I'll keep working at this, and we'll come back and we'll get some progress. All right, guys, we've been just working it back and forth, and you can see we're starting to get it letting go up here. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to see if now, with this end a little loose, I'm going to see if I can work a tool in right here. I'm just going to continue to work this guy loose all the way around. All right, so this side's completely off. And now we just need to go do what we did over here on the inside. It's going to be a little bit harder for me to film that, but you get the idea. We're just going to work it loose, and then we'll be able to pull it down. All right, guys, what I found was just a little bit of prizing on this corner was enough to get this side to finally let go, and then we can pull it down. We have to pull it down this way because this little lip here fits up under the crankshaft pulley. Let me see if I can turn the light just a little bit this way. Fits up right under here because we got the oil pump right here. All right, so setting this guy down for a second and just trying to take a look at where it might have failed. What we can see is gasket failed here because we can see the oil is going out past the gasket material. Looks like it also failed here and failed here. So we got 3 failure points and why this guy was leaking. All right, so what we're going to do now is clean, right? So we're going to get all the old sealant material off of the engine block all the way around, and then we're going to go ahead and do the same thing on the pan, and we're going to clean out the inside of the pan and the outside of the pan, get it nice and clean with some brake clean. So let me show you that next. All right, guys, before we get into cleaning, I just want to make a comment about these E10 sockets, right? So the 2 recessed areas are very narrow, and so you're going to have a socket that's in this kind of 16.5 millimeter range, like you see here. That first socket that I started off with is actually a little bit too large. It's closer to 19. It's just a heavier duty one. It just won't fit into the 2 recessed areas that we had. I'm trying to remember where they were now. These 2 guys here and here. A narrower type of socket. And similarly, if you end up having to fish them out and pull them through, you can see the one here was held in by the sealant. The magnet, similarly, will have to be in the 16 millimeter range in order to fit in there. So just a little bit of a tip there before you get started on this, to have the right tools. So continuing to look at our failure points, similar to what we saw up on the top, right? We can see the matching oil runoff here, here, and probably along here. Everything else is dry all along the edges. This is possibly some leakage here, but not much. Anyway, same deal. We're going to get all this scraped off. Remember, this is aluminum, so you don't want to use a carbide scraper. You just want to use a standard steel gasket scraper. Be careful you don't drop anything into where the oil pickup tube is. And then we're going to get all this cleaned out with some brake clean and come back when it's ready. All right, guys, here's a view underneath. We're just about done here. This area here is one we're going to want to pay extra attention to. Let me see if I can zoom this in a little bit. Maybe not. I guess it's all the way it's going to go. This is an area where we're going to want to put some extra sealant here, and there's a similar one over on this side. This is where the timing cover gasket is, and we want to make sure we seal that seam in. You can also see right around where the oil pump is, there's like an outlined groove. We want to make sure we get the sealant really good into this outlined groove that forms part of the gasket around that area. We've just about got all this cleaning done here. Just got a little bit left to do, and then we'll be ready to mate these two pieces back together again. All right, guys, so we've done the removal section where we pulled off these bolts that hold the transmission, hold the oil pan to the transmission, right? So vehicles with a manual, there are 3. We had an automatic, so we only had 2, although we took out that extra one that held that small shield just to get better clearance. We took out the 16 E10 bolts that went around the perimeter. Don't forget the 2 that are in the recessed area, and then there's 2 at the other end. They talk about prying the oil pan very carefully in order to prevent any damage. Remember, a lot of these parts are aluminum. That place where we went in is one of the 2 places that you can use a prying tool in order to remove the pan. At this point, we're ready to do the installation. The dealer and the service manual have a couple of alignment pins they recommend using. It's a nice thing to have. I suppose if you had some some long threads from a longer bolt, you could cut off and make something like this. I'm not going to use this, but I'm just pointing it out. It's in the service manual. That particular tool is called an EN49980. Then we're going to put a sealing bead around in the form you see here. And sorry about that. I went to get something and I dropped something. This particular material is located in this service manual on page 9, 674, and I'll just show you what that is. And so we see that the oil pan is sealed with a sealant with GM part number 123-78521 in the United States, 88901-148 in Canada. We're in the U.S. though. So we're going to be using this 123-78521 sealant, AC Delco. 2010 is the Delco number, and there's the GM number. This is a very special sealant just for an oil pan on these turbocharged engines. You can get this off Amazon. I'll put a link in the description. We'll end up cutting an opening here, installing this, and it comes with the pre-installed applicator, and then we'll end up loading it up into a caulking gun, just like we were going to do some caulking in the house, that kind of a thing. We're going to run it along in this form. Take note of, if we zoom in here and see what the oil pickup tube is, you notice that they show it only going along the front side of this, not all the way around it. And then they show applying it separately on the outside on the upper part of the block. And then they also show applying some at this point here. Right, so they're telling you to make sure that the thickness of this bead is around 2 millimeters. And they're telling you to apply it, they're telling you to apply it in that groove that I showed you in the earlier clip along, that's what number 1 is, that's that groove that you see cut into the block. And what other notes do they have? They say apply it around the screw bore of the crankshaft bearing cap tie plate, which is that circle area they drew with a bead there. And then they tell you, of course, to put it on the pan, and they tell you to use care when installing the pan. You don't want to smear this, guy. So those little pins that they have are specifically used to prevent you from shifting the pan and smearing the sealant. So if you don't have those kind of tools, you have to be extra careful not to let it slide and smear, right? Because you don't want to get it inside the oil pickup area, nor do you want to disturb the bead around here, or you'll end up with another leak problem. Let's see what other tips. Then they just talk about installing the oil pan and getting those 12 bolts in there and tightening them up to 18 inch-pounds. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get everything reassembled. I'm going to show you applying the beads, but then I'm going to get everything reassembled and we'll go over the torque values. We're basically ready to reassemble everything at this point. All right, guys, we're just going to give one more final wipe with some brake clean around the perimeter of this pan. What you want to see on this pan, we got it reasonably cleaned up. It's not important cosmetically to get everything. What's important is to get this mating surface. And what you want to end up getting back to is kind of like this factory hash marking that you can see. That way you know that you've got, maybe zoom in a little bit, it might be more clear. Yeah, that you know you got all of that gasket material out. All right, and then to get our gasket material open, we're just going to use a box cutter, and we're just going to kind of cut the tip off like that, and then we're going to smooth this on like this, and then we're just going to slide it into a caulking gun. You can see it working its way out. And it's preset for how much you need. And then just like we saw in the service manual, we're going to go all the way around the edge. We're going to start right here. And we're going to lay a 2mm bead. We go around the front of the bolts. All right, so I'm just going to keep going around like this. And we'll come back when we've got this bead all laid down all the way around this pan. All right, guys, we've got this bead laid down, right, just like the service manual, in front of each of the screw holes around this one, just like they show here. And then right around all these, and then right around the front of the oil pickup. Now let's go do the block. All right, guys, and here we've got our sealant around the groove. I told you I was also going to apply some not called out for the service manual around that seam with the gasket for the timing cover. And then we also have our little circle of sealant there. So now we're ready to install our pan. All right, guys, here we go. We're going to very carefully work it up over the pickup tube. I'm going to pick it up. And then we're going to get it right on that pulley. Line up these holes. Squish it into position. Get our first bolt started. Use a small screwdriver to line the hole up. You guys might not be able to see what I'm doing here with the bolt. It's just gotten into early evening on us here with the cleaning. We spent a lot more time cleaning on this than I thought we were going to do. All right, so I'm going to tighten this guy down, and then we'll come over and do the other side. All right, guys, now we're just going to finger tighten another bolt on the rear side. And now with those two bolts holding it, we're in good shape now. Now we're just going to go around. I'm going to finger tighten this when we start on the front a little bit more. Now we're just going to go around and reinstall all 16, or in this case 14 more of these E10s. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to go put the bracket back on that we had over here with the 15 and the 18. And then I'll go over all the torque values. All right, guys, we got the pan back in. We got everything finger tightened, and that's what they tell you to do. Install everything hand tightened to around 2 Newton meters or 18 inch-pounds. And then put the two 15s in that are holding the pan to the bell housing of the transmission. for vehicles with a manual or with an automatic, doesn't matter. They all get torqued down first to 30 foot-pounds or 40 newton meters. After those two 15s are torqued down, and of course for that little plate we have to torque down that 18. I'll give you that torque value in a minute. Then go ahead and torque down all 16 of the pan bolts to 89 inch-pounds or 10 newton meters. We've got that done now. We've got everything sitting in, letting it sit down. I'm just going to show you some of the other parts we're going to throw on because we're not necessarily going to show the reassembly. I mentioned that the service manual says you have to replace the V-clamp. The part number on that from GM is 5556 5351. And by the way, towards the end of the video here, I'll show you how much it costs to do this yourself, still using genuine GM parts and gaskets and sealants versus what the local Chevrolet dealer quoted us for this repair, just to show you the comparison. So there's your V-clamp. We also mentioned that we're going to have to install a new sealing ring between the cat converter and the exhaust pipe, the turbocharger, and that would be this guy here, 555-70704. And you can see if you zoom in here, maybe you can see this, get it down to the clear part of the bag. You see there's a little ridge here, and then this gets crimped closed as you've torqued down the V-clamp. So these two pieces here will complete reconnecting the three-way front converter to the turbocharger, and then we'll reconnect the O2 sensor and we'll tighten down those two 10mm nuts, and I'll give you those torque values as we get further along. This is the next thing we'll do. And then also we're going to have a new gasket for where the exhaust pipe flange comes up to that converter. If I can get this plastic open here. All right, so we got a new gasket from GM. And that part number is 132-525-0100. You can zoom in here and you can see that. And then the nuts that have to get replaced, I mentioned these copper-clad kind of nuts get replaced on that. And that part number is 111-02751. So we'll get this much reassembled. The other thing we're going to do is we're going to pull the oil pan drain plug gasket off just while we're doing all this. We're going to make sure there's a fresh gasket on there. And the gasket for the oil drain plug is 5556-9307. So we'll get all these guys installed, and then we'll talk about the follow-up torque values, and we'll continue moving back on to the middle of the car. All right, guys, we're going to let that set up for about 45 minutes or so while we do the reassembly. That'll give time for the sealant to firm up and be ready to take the oil. And after you get the reassembly done, you're at the point where you can re-add the oil. We can see here that the type of oil we're going to use is a weight of 5W30 right on the cap. It's going to be a DexOS1 grade oil. You don't see it on this cap, but I'll show you in a minute how you see on later year caps they actually added that. Instead for here, I'll just throw the logo of what you want to look for on the oil. And as you take a look at the dipstick after you've filled, what you're looking for is you're looking for the oil to sit between these two hash marks, right? So the hash mark here at the top means you've overfilled. The hash mark down below means you've underfilled. And the correct operating range is anywhere in between these two that don't have a hash mark. So you can see like here, we want to get it just right up to the top there, right before it starts the hash of the overfill. That's the good spot to be in. Newer engines like this 2015, the cap will say DexOS right on it, 5W30. Either way, that's the type of oil you're going to use. Guys, final stretch, last tips. So we're about to put this cross member on and these bolts here that we talked about earlier. Right? We've got the two 13mm we can reuse, the two 13mm nuts that we can reuse, and then the outer two 15 torque to yield bolts that have to be replaced. And so if we go back over what we showed before, those M10 torque to yield bolts that you cannot reuse, they go to 44 foot-pounds plus an additional 30 to 45 degrees. The part number on those bolts is 115-61374. Right, so it's just like the ones you took off. And then the torque on the bolt, the 13mm bolt, is 16 foot-pounds, and the insulator nuts is 13 foot-pounds. So you guys can see we got everything under the hood all buttoned up. We got our exhaust shield back on. We got this V-clamp torqued down to the torque value that was specified, which was 115 inch-pounds. We got our exhaust shield back on, which was 71 inch-pounds. And again, we can see that in our book here. If we take a look at the V-clamp section, we can see tighten the V-clamp to 115 foot-pounds. Gosh, sorry about that, guys. Inch-pounds, 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 inch-pounds. 115 inch-pounds on this V-clamp. And then we go back a little bit. We can get the value for the heat shield on the turbocharger right here. And that is 71 inch-pounds. Let's see, what else? Let me show you underneath, torquing this bolt down and how to do the torque angle piece. And all right, guys, we're underneath here. We can see we got our shield reinstalled. We got that all cleaned up. We cleaned off the frame rail. Before we did that, we come around over here. We can see our shiny new copper-clad nuts. If I can get you guys the right lighting here. There we go. Shiny new copper-clad nuts, all torqued down to spec with a new gasket installed. Got this guy reasonably cleaned up down here. Don't forget to torque down the oil pan drain bolt, which is cast right there into the aluminum, as you can see, at 14 Newton meters after you put that new gasket on. Also, don't forget to torque down the oil filter housing, which also has the torque value cast into the top, which I believe is 25 Newton meters. All right, so let's head on to the back and do those bolts. All right, guys, we got that outer 15 torqued to 44 foot-pounds. We're going to do that additional 35 to 40 degrees with our torque angle gauge. We're going to use the retaining bar against the actual cross member. So if you look underneath here, this guy will fit in very nicely, just like that. And I'm just using a mirror here because, again, you know, we're not on a lift. We got this guy just up on a ramp. That's enough for us to see what we need to see. Hopefully you guys can see it too. And what I'm going to do is just do that additional 35 to 40 degrees of torque. All right, there we go, right at 40. So we within the range of the service manual. So that is that. All right, guys, those of you in a northern climate, I said I owed you showing how to remove the engine oil heater, which you'll have to do to get to the oil pan. That's what this looks like here, is engine oil heater replacement. It's an option that you can get, usually only found on northern cars, but there's a bolt that holds the bracket for the heater that's obstructing your ability to pull the pan down. It's just this one bolt, and it gets tightened up when you put it back together to 30 foot-pounds. So guys, I'll put links in the description for all of the parts that we had here from GM. If you got questions, you're looking for help with this particular video, go ahead and leave a comment below and I'll try to help. If this video saved you some time or money, or you just found it interesting, I'd appreciate you hitting that like button. It helps with video discovery. And as always, thanks for watching.